We'll just wait a moment longer for all of our attendees to join us. So we'll give about 30 seconds more for people to hop in and we'll get started. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's T2M webinar, Transition to Management for Queensland. We really appreciate you making the time to attend as we provide a bit of an update of the latest for Varroa mite in Queensland, which is actually quite a significant amount of things that have changed since our last T2M webinar update. So quite a lot of juicy details for us tonight. I'm Kathy, and I'm one of the 6 Queensland Varroa Development Officers. And tonight our presentation will feature Mr. Rob Stevens, Manager of Biosecurity Queensland's Varroa mite Innovation and Resilience Initiative. And Rob's actually leading our proceedings tonight. Rob's going to be sharing with us details about the detections of Varroa mite in Queensland since early March, which has been keeping our team very busy, I can guarantee you that. And then Rob's going to give us an overview of how the mite will be managed into the future and what this means for our beekeeping community. We've also got Paul Garland, Extension and Engagement Coordinator with the National Varroa Mite Management Program, who will be presenting this evening with an update on the activities being conducted by myself and the rest of the Varroa Development Officers in the team. So the support and resources available for Queensland beekeepers is going to be covered so that you're all up to date. We do have a few of our other staff members online and behind the scenes to help answer any questions that you have. Joining us also tonight, we welcome President of the Queensland Beekeepers Association, Mr. Jacob Stevens, on screen with Rob tonight, who will be available to provide an industry perspective to any questions from the floor during the question and answer session at the end of the preso. Before we get started, I'd just like to let everyone know that we are recording the presentation tonight. And I'd like to draw your attention to just a couple of housekeeping items. So to ensure that our time together is positive and productive, we just want everyone to maintain a professional and civil discourse throughout the evening, if you would please. This presentation we expect to run for about 40 minutes and will be followed by a question and answer session. So throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the chat function. So if you have a look on the top of your screen, you should see a little chat bubble, and I've just popped a message in the chat so that you can see where it is. You're very welcome to put your questions in the chat and we will try to address those as they come through or together at the end. All right, enough from me. To begin, please welcome Mr. Rob Stevens.
I know, thank you, Kathy. We'll get straight into it. So I would like to respectfully acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the traditional custodians of the country of which we meet here today, and I pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the lands we work. So thanks to Kathy for the introduction. Like she said, I'm going to cover a few topics tonight. I'll cover the current state of play here in Queensland, what we plan to do for managing Varroa into the future. And then we're going to hand over to Paul, who's going to highlight some of the great work that the likes of Kathy are doing in the VDO program and the workshops and the whole transition to management program nationally, as well as some of the support functions for beekeepers. And we'll also have Jacob hang around along with Paul and myself for a Q&A session at the end. So to begin with, excuse me, current state. Varroa is now established in multiple states in Australia, including Queensland. Also, unfortunately, recently including multiple areas within Queensland. So how did we get here? It all started in June 2022 when Varroa was first detected, Port of Newcastle. They attempted eradication for up until September 2023 when it was decided not technically feasible to eradicate. By February of last year, the National Response Plan was endorsed, which led to the National Varroa Mite Management Program, which funds the VDOs and our workshops in Queensland. And around that same time, Victoria had its first detection. So then that brings us to March of this year, and it was our turn. Queensland had its first Varroa mite detection in the Lockyer Valley in March. By April, it was the ACT's turn. In early May, we had multiple infested properties around the Lockyer Valley, Somerset and Brisbane City Council areas. And then by the end of May, we had detections well and truly in the commercial sector, and more recently, just last week, in our Gold Coast Sentinel hives. So as of today, there are 62 confirmed detections of Varroa mite across the Lockyer Valley, Somerset, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Quilpie and North Burnett local government areas. This number is going to keep going up as beekeepers begin to increase testing. So what's really critical is that beekeepers get out there and test and don't use winter as an excuse. We're not going to get away with 16-week testing anymore. If Varroa is in your local government area, you need to be testing monthly. So Varroa remains a notifiable pest in Queensland, just like it does in all the other jurisdictions. Look, we're similar to New South Wales, and we're already finding some really high levels of mites, and people are getting away with that in what we call the honeymoon period. But you're not going to get away with that forever. If you go into autumn, into spring, by the end of spring, you could well and truly have hundreds of mites in an alcohol wash. So really important to monitor and that early intervention. So until today, hopefully everyone's seen our pre-existing Varroa heat map. So this worked on a system where if a positive detection took place, any locality within 10 kilometres of that detection would light up. As of today, though, our map has now transitioned to a new system where it much more aligns to the national standard, and it's a grid system of 100 square kilometre grids. This map still is really good right now for showing the spread across Queensland, though. You can see it out there in Western Queensland, in the Lockyer Valley, in Brisbane, up there in the Burnett, and just recently on the Goldie this week. So we've already started to have Queensland beekeepers that are up to their second round of treatment, and we only had our first detection in March. So look, it's really, really important to thank the brave beekeepers who have come forward and acknowledged that they have got Varroa mite, including more recently some of our commercial beekeepers out west and up in that Burnett region. So it's really, really important. If we want the heat map to work, we need to have beekeepers buy in and to be submitting both their positive and negative data, and that way beekeepers can make informed decisions about where Varroa is in the state. So we're already starting to paint a bit of a picture what's happening in some of our areas that have been infested a little bit longer, and we're already seeing high reinfestation rates, much like they do in New South Wales. So we've had some cases of beekeepers testing and having 0 mites, and then less than 5 weeks later, they're above threshold. So again, you're not going to get away with not testing throughout winter. If you're in these areas, you've got to have consistent and regular testing moving forward, and you need to have a plan of action of what you're going to do when you get Varroa. So we're here to support you. And we also really encourage people, if you're already not part of the QBA or part of your local beekeeping group, this networking is going to be essential moving forward. So we really want to, again, highlight the good work that has been done so far. So since our first detection in March, we've had over 1,000 public reports through our B123 system. Hopefully everyone here tonight is well and truly aware of B123. If not, we'll chuck the link in the chat, also QR code up on screen. But effectively, since the first detection, we've had 1,000 reports, and that means beekeepers have gone out and tested individually 5,000 hives belonging to apiaries that contain over 20,000 hives. So this is really, really good to see these numbers moving in the right direction. So Our program's been around a while in different forms, so since the first detection in 2022, but you can really see this trend is moving in the right. It's moving in the right direction where we want it to. So since our program began in July of this year, you can see that the public reporting numbers are moving up, and in particular, since we got that first detection in March, you can see them skyrocketing. But we don't want that line to drop in the future. In fact, it's really, really important that even throughout winter, we don't see a huge dip in that line, and then moving into spring and summer, we only want to see this line grow and have more and more beekeepers regularly testing and submitting their data to our V123 system. So as I said, our map has recently undergone a change. So again, scan the QR code. We'll put the link in the chat to get to our heat mapping and cool mapping. This map includes your B123 data, but it also includes government-led surveillance data that we do on sentinel hives or targeted surveillance, in particular around interstate movement. So at the moment, we are validating each positive result before it goes live on the map. And that'll continue into the immediate future. But in the long term, as more beekeepers become aware, we'll increase that level of trust, and that system will allow beekeepers to submit their results throughout the state. So the updated heat map conforms with the national heat map standard. So 0.1 degree graticule means each square grid of that map is around about 100 square kilometres. So we think it's a little bit easier to read than our existing one. I know people were getting a little bit confused with the locality system, thinking that every locality that was hot on the map had that level of detections. This one is a lot more simple. You click on the 100-kilometre grid, it tells you exactly how many positives and negatives have occurred in that 100 square kilometre grid. So again, we want you to use this map moving forward to make informed decisions on your bee movements. And this just aligns with our interstate colleagues. So the New South Wales heat map has been around for a significant amount of time. Like I said, Victoria has had Varroa since late last year. Really important that beekeepers know how to access these maps online, especially our commercial beekeepers that are doing interstate movement. You should be aware of the risks and the corridors you're going through. So in addition to the passive surveillance performed through B123, like I said, government is doing its own surveillance. So we've really stepped it up along the border, trying to provide that advanced early warning of natural spread from New South Wales into Queensland. We've got 18 sentinel hives across 17 key locations across the border areas, particularly in areas like the Gold Coast, Stanthorpe, Warwick, Killarney. And just last week, 3 of our sentinel hives along that stretch from the Currumbin Valley to Tweed Heads, we've had 3 positive detections. We also had a positive detection in our sentinel hives just outside the port of Brisbane as well. And then that really highlighted the need for more people to be testing in the Brisbane area. And we've well and truly confirmed that established population has moved towards the port, not away from the port. So we're confident that that was not a new arrival through the port, and that we really need to encourage more detection in more monitoring and surveillance in those port adjacent suburbs. So even though Varroa is here in certain areas of Queensland, the threat still remains at the border areas. So there's really high levels of mite being reported in areas along the border, especially in that Murwillumbah area, around the Gold Coast, around Legume, Drake, Kyogle, Byron, Ballina, Lismore, all these places directly over the border. Bulgabilla has had detections, but not in the higher levels. But obviously that's directly adjacent to southeast Queensland, which is one of the highest density beekeeping zones in Australia. So for that reason, to help combat this, we've started to authorise some beekeepers to use miticide and sticky mats for surveillance purposes, which is different to the way you would use under permit your chemical treatments for when you have Varroa mite. So particularly in areas like Gundawindi that are hard for us to get out and service regularly, we've authorised beekeepers to use that chemical and do that testing themselves on a 6-weekly process. So this model is going to be rolled out in other areas like Stanthorpe and Warwick, and even the Gold Coast areas, to eliminate the need for us to have to service them every 6 weeks. So Along with that, we're also using AI technology along the border. So we've got what we call BeeRite technology, which is like the next iteration of the Purple Hive project. So it's got sensors within the hive that measure things like humidity, sound, vibration, and that uses an AI algorithm to monitor, and that gives us real-time detection, so we don't have to wait on that 6-weekly testing cycle. So that's already been rolled out in some of those key sentinel hive areas. So that takes us to managing Varroa mite now that it's here into Queensland. And really, every beekeeper should have an awareness of integrated pest management by now. If you haven't attended a workshop, we really encourage you to, and Paul's going to touch on that later. But the time is now that Varroa is well and truly in Queensland in multiple areas, and beekeepers have to make themselves aware. So over the next 2 years, you're going to hear a lot of these terms. I've already mentioned it tonight. The build-up phase, that's where Queensland is now. So that's a period that's going to last between 2 and 5 years. That's where our wild bees are eventually going to die out if they remain untreated. Reinfestation is going to be our biggest enemy. Even beekeepers doing the right thing, they will suffer from reinfestation until those wild bees do die out. And given the size of Queensland, we're going to have different parts of the states on different timelines. Hopefully we can keep it out of certain areas for longer, but that is going to complicate the issue if we are on different timelines. Eventually, we will move into what we call the established phase. That could take up to 5 years, especially in certain areas of Queensland. Hopefully, what's left of the wild population will be more tolerant, and hopefully our treatment frequency in Queensland is going to start to ease to only a few times a year. But that's going to take time. It's going to get worse before it gets better. So having said that, our Varroa mite's place in our own legislation is going to mirror that spread. So certain things aren't going to change. So you've got a requirement right now. If you own one hive, you're required to register as a registered biosecurity entity. That'll get you a hive identification number. You should be displaying that number. If your hives are on a property other than your own, you should be having contact information displayed. You've got what we call a general biosecurity obligation. We don't expect you to know about every threat out there in the biosecurity world, but as beekeepers, you should know about Varroa mite, and you should be instigating an integrated pest management system. So you are required to treat Varroa once you know you have it. So nothing's going to change in the immediate future in terms of notification. Varroa mite will remain notifiable, and you will be required to report it to Biosecurity Queensland, and that can be fulfilled just by reporting to the B123 system. So you are going to be still having a requirement for your record management as well, both in terms of your health checks, your movement control, and very soon in the future, it's really important that beekeepers need to understand that they are required to keep records on chemical usage. So another one that remains under our legislation, won't affect most of you, is that there is a far northern biosecurity zone in place. People way up in the tip of North Queensland aren't allowed to move bees outside of that zone. So other things are going to change though in this space, in particular around the classification of Varroa. So we have already approved the delisting of Varroa as prohibited matter because it is now endemic in Queensland and no longer fits that classification. What we're proposing is in the very near future that this will get reclassified as Category 2 restricted matter, which will mean you will still be obligated to report it to your biosecurity officer through B123, and you will be required to contain it and not exacerbate its spread. We are proposing to amend our Reg 2 and rescind the Varroa mite biosecurity zone, which is the whole state of Queensland. So that's going to start to really free up movement control from interstate. So like I mentioned before too, your record management obligations are going to increase, that you will be required to keep records on chemical treatment. Now, this also means we've updated that interstate movement. We've got a staged reopening of the borders to other jurisdictions that have Varroa mite. We're well and truly moving along our pathway to permanent legislation change. We've had our Varroa initial detection. We've started to repatriate people that were stuck in New South Wales. We've also started to allow a bit more free movement from interstate beekeepers. And we're just moving into this third phase now of what we call multi-use biosecurity instrument permits. So now that Varroa mite is spread in multiple areas in the state, we are going to start simplifying the entry conditions and issuing longer term permits. And look, the conditions of entry are going to stay largely the same, but it will eliminate the need for repeated application. And like I said, we will move forward with some of those proposed legislative changes. So really it just means the onus is moving on to beekeepers to do their part. So it's really important that beekeepers acknowledge their general biosecurity obligation. They don't exacerbate the spread. During build-up phase, it's really essential that people are monitoring and they understand their obligations under integrated pest management. So, and we'll keep on mentioning the record keeping. You should be having records for your hive checks, your chemical usage, and your movement of hives. But it's also really important that beekeepers are increasing their communication both with each other and potentially with us and our VDO network as well, that those support structures are in place. So that takes us to future activities. So look, there's a lot of doom and gloom with Varroa mite, but with crisis does come opportunity. When we do get out the back end of this, there are some positives for when Varroa is stable. Feral bee colonies will decline. That means that there will be more reliance on beekeepers for managed hive services. There should be less competition from feral hives, increased availability of floral resources, more honey yield. Eventually, this won't happen straight away, but when feral colonies do reduce, eventually, hopefully, small hive beetle and American foul brood reinfestation should decline, and beekeepers are going to have better access to improved genetic improvement. And we're going to have better, more resilient beekeepers out of the end of this. Beekeepers are going to be required to check their hives more often. It'll make them better quality beekeepers. And hopefully we've got better communication between beekeepers and pollination reliant industries at the end of this as well. So I just want to take the opportunity to highlight some of the work that my program is doing, the Varroa mite Innovation and Resilience Initiative. There are some key bodies of work. One of them is the Biosecurity Roundtable, which we just held late last month. This was a 2-day event, and this was really making sure that industry had a seat at the table for the long-term management of Varroa mite. So we talked about some really important topics like compliance, regulation, pollination and industry future, integrated pest management, information and research knowledge gaps, tools, education and support, and also the financial planning and economic considerations as well. So we had people from across the recreational sector, from all our major bee clubs in the state, the Queensland Beekeeping Association, pollination reliant industries, honey packers, you name it, anyone with an association with the bee industry, we invited to our event. So out of that event came 76 strategies were developed. Our next job is to prioritise these strategies and into what can be delivered in the timeframe of our program. The next step is that we're going to release those results from that roundtable event to industry, and we're going to start figuring out how we prioritise those strategies and how we can really have that shared responsibility model rolled out throughout the state that shows what our part is and also what industry's part is with Varroa mite management moving forward. Another key piece of work we're going to be delivering is stakeholder behavioural analysis. We want to ensure that our communication methods with your industry is working. So we've engaged an external provider, Ernst & Young, to engage with beekeepers across the state, whether that be commercial, recreational, new beekeepers, experienced beekeepers, and across the zones in the state to really see that our messaging is working. So that's going to be delivered in 2 different ways, through qualitative research, which will be detailed interviews with those beekeeper groups. If anyone's interested in participating in that qualitative research, just send us an email. We'll put the email address in the chat, varroa@dpi.qld.gov.au, and you can nominate and we'll pass your contact details on to the provider. And in the very near future, we're going to roll out the quantitative research as well, which is basically a big open survey, which we want as many beekeepers as possible to fill out. You should all know about our Community Bee Innovation Grant Program by now. It's 3 years worth of funding, over $500,000. Round 1 has just recently closed, and we're expecting to be contacting successful applicants in the very near future. Round 2 is our largest round for $250,000. The grants range anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000. Round 2 will be open in July, and round 3 we would expect to be around about this same time next year. So it's really important that the grants align to the objectives. That's to deliver innovative Varroa mite education and training, and or to develop innovation through Varroa mite management tools. So that will be going live very, very soon, and we will disseminate that through our engagement networks. So, sorry, that takes me to Paul. So at this point, I'll hand over to Paul. He's our Extension Engagement Coordinator for Queensland's component of the National Varroa Mite Management Project. So Paul's going to take you through some of the work that his team are doing, and also some of those support options for Queensland beekeepers. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Rob. So I'm going to cover the support for Queensland beekeepers, including the National Varroa Mite Management Programs component within Queensland. So basically, we've rolled out 19 workshops within Queensland so far for Varroa mite management, and in those workshops, we've had 331 commercial beekeepers attend, and 1,053 recreational beekeepers. So the national program has estimated that we've actually reached 36% of the registered hives within Queensland, and the actual feedback has been very good from all the participants, showing that we've actually been hitting the mark with actually upgrading their knowledge and understanding of Varroa mite to feeling more prepared for dealing with it when it reaches our next slide, please. All right, so yes, obviously the Varroa management workshops are very useful. So we've got 2 Varroa mite workshops that are actually scheduled for June at Southport, just before the QBA conference, and we have a new one that's actually been scheduled for July in the Lockyer. So the Southport one, one of the Southport ones and one of the Lockyer ones will be an introduction to Varroa mite management, and it was both suitable for recreational and commercial beekeepers, and it'll cover Varroa mite management impact and its Varroa mite impacts, the importance of monitoring and thresholds, integrated pest management and Varroa mite, which includes the actual chemical options, including non-synthetic options there, brood location, brood rotation, and other management options that are there, including record keeping, as Rob was emphasising earlier. So that's Lockyer and Southport, but running coinciding with that one at Southport, we also have an advanced Varroa mite management workshop, which is really designed for commercial beekeepers, those commercial beekeepers with a reasonable basic understanding already of Varroa mite management, and it'll cover impacts of colony loss on commercial beekeeping businesses, strategies for improving business decision making, how to develop an effective management plan, case studies, Queensland and New South Wales case studies. We hear from beekeepers and what the challenges they've faced and what they've implemented, and some of the outcomes from those activities. Also preparing hives for pollination and the future pollination outlook, and also covering federal and state support services available for commercial beekeepers. Next slide, please. All right, so the Varroa development officers and their engagement activities. Hopefully, many of you have already engaged the services of these guys. So they're basically, you can see on the map there, they've done a good spread everywhere at the moment, and they're continuing to get out and visit people wherever possible. They'll do individual one-on-one engagements. They'll do work in people's hives with them to show them techniques and activities, small groups, large groups, presentations, mini workshops, whatever works. And as of today's date, we've got 928 total interactions done by the VDOs, and 4,721 participants in those interactions. Next slide. So predominantly most of the activities have been happening in the southeast corner. not only because of the high population of beekeepers, but also the fact that we have Varroa mite in those spaces at the moment. Next slide. All right, the National Virus Benchmarking Project. This is a project that was established to give us a baseline of the exotic and endemic viruses present in our European honeybees across the Australian landscape. So the main reason for this activity was to give us a clear understanding of what viruses are present, and so we can monitor any of those impacts of those viruses, but also to know what to look out for that may be other virus introductions in future, to make sure we're on top of those. So samples have been collected geographically across Queensland as to try, and similar in each of the populations in the other jurisdictions as well. Within Queensland, the VMIRI program has coordinated these volunteer beekeepers volunteering their time and bees to be able to provide to the labs to be able to do this work. So the Varroa development officers have gone out and assisted wherever they had the need to, wherever they've been required. And each one of the participating beekeepers have provided about 100 bees from each one of their apiaries, and some of the beekeepers have provided multiple samples from multiple apiaries. Next slide, please. So within Queensland, we've collected 83 individual samples from 66 beekeepers, and that included 270 separate hives. So we'd like to, and you sort of see on the map there, you can see the distribution of those samples. You can see they're fairly widespread and a good population, geographical locations based on populations of beekeepers. And we'd like to thank those beekeepers volunteering their time and also their bees for this activity. Next slide, please. All right, so continuing supports for Queensland beekeepers. So we've obviously got the Varroa development officers, and they'll support here. We'll use them while you've still got the opportunity. They're here for the next few months. Then we have the Biosecurity champions, which hopefully many of you are aware of, and they can support you as well through your recreational bee clubs. And we have the National Varroa Mite Management Program also has a resilience officer, which actually can support those having impacts, support for those that are impacted by Varroa mite. And the VMIRI team will continue to serve the beekeeping community until middle of 2027. Next slide, please. So a bit more detail for each one of those. So the Varroa development officers, yes, they're a free service. Please utilise them. They can be out there assisting you in whatever you need assistance with for getting your capacity to be able to deal with Varroa mite, whether it's actually detection of Varroa mite, the monitoring process, any integrated pest management, things like that. Just use them while they're here. We don't want to. I've heard a few people say, "Oh, we'll call the Varroa development officer when I get Varroa mite." Well, maybe that might be too late. In some cases, they may not be around to support you in that same way. Might not have the same level of resources. So you can always email varroa@dpi.qld.gov.au, and you can see that they're at the moment they're distributed around the state. So there's a Varroa development officer, so to speak, near you to be able to service your support you and your needs. Next slide, please, Rob. All right, the Biosecurity Champion Network, as I briefly mentioned before, it was established to support beekeepers understanding of biosecurity practice and best practice management for pests and diseases. It's also set up industry for the long haul, just for the beekeeping community to have those long-term supports. And these network is spread across the recreational bee clubs and groups from Cairns all the way to New South Wales border. So there's about 25 biosecurity champions spread throughout the clubs. The network meets every month, and they provide the latest resources and messaging for those biosecurity champions. This network forms an important information circuit between beekeeping community to government and vice versa. So it's both opportunities to be able to talk into each other's needs for there. So you can contact your local bee clubs for more information. Next slide, please. All right, supports from the National Varroa Mite Management Program. So as I mentioned before, we have Jamie, who's the National Resilience Officer. He's there until December, and he's there to provide support for those impacted by Varroa mite. And he's available to all states and territories. Also, we have a farm business resilience workshop happening in July 2025. And any information about any of these national type programs, you can head to varroa.org.au. So within Queensland, we have the Varroa Mite Initiative, Innovation and Resilience Initiative, as we call it, VMIRI. So the VMIRI program, it will be still continuing until middle of 2027, June 2027, and they'll aim to put on a engagement officer to support beekeepers, the beekeeping community, until that same time. The actual program will continue to provide information and resources such as brochures, talking points, etc. The Bee Alert, which is greatly taken up already, but it's a regular newsletter. There's a QR code there on the right-hand side that you can see that will lead you to the actual Bee Alert, and any other further information for any of those VMIRI programs, you can go to varroa@dpi.qld.gov.au. And I think it's time to hand over to questions.
Thank you, Paul. We really appreciate you taking the time to outline the support that's available to all beekeepers, no matter how many hives you have. And we just want to repeat and urge that call to all Queensland beekeepers to take advantage of this support while it's still available. So we're now entering into the question and answer segment of the evening, and I'd like to now invite Rob Stevens back on the screen there, and also President of QBA, Jacob Stevens, and it's time to get to the questions. So if you have a question for the group, please pop them into the chat. I think I did see something in the Q&A where we'd like you to please use the chat so that we can see all of the questions together. If you have a question, pop them in there, and we might have a look at any that haven't already been answered in the chat. I think I have one here for you, Rob. One question that hasn't yet been answered. Do other countries with Varroa routinely treat their hives with Varroa chemicals, even if they do not have any mites, like we do for small hive beetle?
Look, we're not encouraging what we call prophylactic treatment. That all our training will involve integrated pest management, which revolves around monitoring. Once you reach threshold level, that's when you should be applying chemical treatment. And there's financial benefits for that as well. It doesn't come for free treating your hive. And if you're going to be doing multiple treatments per year, you don't want to be doing one of those when there's no Varroa in your hive. So I'm sure different countries do it differently. Look, some commercial beekeepers will have to make some financial decisions on when they choose to treat based on pollination contracts and things like that. But to the average beekeeper, you should be instigating your integrated pest management program, which is monitor. Once you reach threshold is when you treat with chemical. That's also bearing in mind your other treatment options as well. Sorry, your other integrated pest management options as well around cultural controls and mechanical controls. That chemical isn't your first and only option.
Okay, Rob, I think I have another one for you here. Is there anything that we can do to support an extended timeframe for the VDOs to remain in their roles whilst we move forward through management of Varroa mite?
So we're looking at all available options to see how long we can extend our budget allocation for our VDOs. We just want to make it clear what the worst case scenario is, that the VDOs could end potentially around September, but we'll be doing all we can to extend those VDOs with the budget we have. As Paul mentioned, under our VMIRI program, we've got the capacity for a Varroa development officer as well, which will stay on for the life of the program. The absolute end date for the VDOs, though, under the national program is February. That's when the national program ends, and the national funding, which is national cost share, won't continue past that time. And that's when it would rely on solely the states. So that's where our VMIRI program comes into play.
So looks like we've got a couple of questions being addressed in the chat there. There's a question here about methods being used to educate the farming community about the effects of lost feral bees and the requirements that the farming community might need to use for pollination in the future.
Yeah, so that's obviously a major body of work that we think is required both in Queensland and nationally. And at our Bee Biosecurity Roundtable, we really tried to focus on that and invite pollination-reliant industries. Through the national program, there is a pollination coordinator, pollination guides, industry best practices all being rolled out to these pollination-reliant industries, some of which don't have a great understanding of what their reliance on honeybees are for pollination. And there are whole zones in Australia that probably benefit directly from incidental pollination from these wild honeybees. And when the wild honeybees die out, they are going to feel the effects. So that creates opportunities for beekeepers. It will improve relationships between beekeepers and pollination-reliant industries. But this is going to take time. It's not going to be an immediate transition. And we are very much targeting those pollination-reliant industries and trying to work with them and give them more information so they understand what it's going to mean for them in the future when these feral bees no longer exist or in much reduced numbers.
Okay, Rob, another question for you. Is once a month Varroa testing recommended at the moment in the current season?
I would say yes. Look, I know it's starting to cool off there now, but it has been a fairly mild winter so far. Look, you're going to have to use your best judgment on when you pick an opportunity to open your hive. But if you decide to leave it through winter, it might be too late. So you're going to have to plan around when you want to crack open your hive and do some testing. I'm sure there'll be some warm days. You need to take advantage of those, and you need to be monitoring regularly.
And I'd like to now ask Jacob if you'd like to weigh in with any thoughts or any other answers to any of the questions that we've got in the chat there, Jacob.
Thanks, Kathy. Look, I'll just go back to the question about Varroa treatment in other countries. I think we've got a really good opportunity to learn from a lot of other places around the world. Some countries do it very well, some countries not so well at the moment. So we do have an opportunity to learn there, and I think it's really important to remember that these treatments obviously don't take our mites back to zero, that they naturally, in that established phase that Rob discussed a little bit earlier, there's going to be an underlying mite load there all the time, and they're naturally going to build once we're out of this build up and reinfestation stages. So it's really important just to have a bit of a plan, and obviously the next couple of years are going to be a very much a monitor and treat as needed basis. But as we become established, I think we can have a little bit more of an annual plan for most things there. So that was just one little thing there. And just on Rob's thing, that obviously the QBA's lobbying quite hard to continue to have capacity in the department beyond our VDO program. So I think that's something that an organisation like ours has been very strong, speaking with ministers and the like, to see some increased capacity and some of the work that the VDOs continue. So that's something that us as the QBA and ARBIC, our national peak body, are very cognizant of that. We're going to see states that have VDOs that aren't even going to be there when they have Varroa, so there needs to be capacity in our state departments to manage that going forwards.
Thank you, Jacob. There's a couple questions popping up about how to get in touch with the Biosecurity Network or your local Varroa officers. Does anybody want to speak to that briefly?
I can take that one. Definitely for your Varroa development officers, use the email address. It's still on your screen, varroa@dpi.qld.gov.au. That's going to be your contact point for both our VDO program and our VMIRI program. We can also put you in contact with your nearest biosecurity champion as well. At this stage, we probably won't be distributing the list to everyone, but that's something we can talk to our Biosecurity Champion Network about. But by all means, email us directly and we will put you in contact with your local club or your local VDO.
Thanks, Rob. Can I direct the next one to Jacob again, please? Question about how can we, the beekeeping people, how can we help the QBA in their lobbying state and federal members? What is it that we could be doing to help, Jacob?
Yeah, I think it's really important that that beekeepers around the state are members of either their local bee club or an organisation like the QBA. I think that's the best way that that people can help. I think it's really important that that we have a united voice, and obviously the QBA has about 13 affiliated local bee clubs around the state, and they bring their concerns to us, and we're able to take that to government as a united voice. So that certainly gives us that little bit of more clarity there. So I think it's just really important to sign up and be a member and be a part of these organisations that we all need as much help as we can get to run the organisations, and I think that's a key message, to be a member.
Thanks for that one. I've got another question about peppermint oil. So peppermint oil appears to be working well as a deterrent for small hive beetles. Is there anything similar for Varroa?
I might throw that over to our VDOs, who probably are a little bit more up to date with current knowledge. But look, these things, Australia is not the first place to get Varroa, like Jacob said. We can take advantage of research that has been done overseas. There's other things where I'm sure Australia's ingenuity and innovation is going to lead to future Varroa management options, and that's exactly what our grant project is about. I don't know specifically about peppermint oil myself in relation to small hive beetle, but there are quite a few weird and wonderful ideas for Varroa mite management. These things are all being addressed in the research gap study that I talked about before, and these organisations such as AgriFutures and Hort Innovation Australia are looking at where these research gaps exist and where more work can be done. Of particular interest for us is Northern Australia and things like interaction with small hive beetle, and just a lot of the information we are getting through this program, we acknowledge does come from more temperate climates, and Queensland might have some lessons to be learnt, and we might have a rougher go of it than they're having in some of our southern neighbouring jurisdictions. So look, the jury's still out on some of these issues, and there is more research required.
Okay, thanks, Rob. So while we're talking about different products, would you care to give a comment on Varroxan? Any idea when Varroxan may be approved?
That's not one I know about. Not sure if Jacob, if that's one you know about, but yeah. And some of these chemicals, I should acknowledge, have different names overseas, and when they're going through the chemical registration process here, might not be called the same thing. But that's not one I know about. And look, I'd really encourage people to stay up to date with where the chemical applications are with APVMA. There's a really good resource on the ARBIC website if you want to see where all the limited use permits are. it's going to be really, really important moving forward as these things do get Australian labels. So I think I saw someone in the chat talking about oxalic strips. So the one that I know that is probably most likely to come is a Lewin cap, which is probably very similar, which will be an oxalic strip. That's probably at least 6 months away, but he's going through that chemical application process.
Yeah, just to add to that, Rob, that Lewin cap and Varoxan are both those extended release oxalic acid strips, and as Rob said, that Lewin cap is certainly going through that process. So that is more of a federal type issue. So obviously, New South Wales DPI and ARBIC are continuing to lobby on those couple of matters to make sure that we do have all those chemical classes that are used around the rest of the world approved for use in Australia. And I just go back to the peppermint oil comment there, that some of these other unapproved natural things, we just need to remember that there's obviously food safety aspect to all of this as well, so that these things need to be used according to their label and used correctly too.
Exactly. Thanks, Jacob.
Great. So let's just do one more whip around. Anybody, last chance for questions or comments. If anybody has anything else that they would like to bring up, now's your chance. Otherwise, we might start to wrap the webinar up.
And look, our team's always available. Again, varroa@dpi.qld.gov.au. If you've got any questions you think of later, if you want to talk to a VDO, if you want to talk to our VMIRI team, just get in contact. We are here to support you.
And just one final comment from me, Kathy, would be that I think we need to take that advice on monitoring for mites monthly really quite seriously. Is that, we're starting to see that in Queensland, that we have case studies in Queensland where it goes from no mites, and 3 weeks later we're above threshold. We've seen and we've heard about this out of New South Wales, but we've actually got case studies of it in Queensland. So we really do need to take that very seriously. And once we get to threshold, do the right thing, treat, and be as up to date as we can, and keep those records, and do things properly.
And keep reporting as well, especially for our commercial beekeepers who are moving hives around. If you are testing monthly and your hive's in a different location, we want you to re-report that positive result. So really, really important. Like we've said multiple times, you're not going to get away with not testing all through winter if Varroa's right next door. You need to monitor, and you need to keep it up, and you need to get into there monthly, and you need to intervene with treatment at the earliest possible time.
So we have maybe a couple questions in there in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see them or if we're going to address those. Sorry. Any comments on using icing sugar to dust bees to encourage their grooming?
Look, we wouldn't recommend it because, look, I think if a lot of people have seen the updated information that came out, a lot of beekeepers weren't comfortable with doing alcohol washes to start with and preferred using the sugar shake. Icing sugar is one of the things that can be used in a sugar shake. It will kill bees. So it might encourage some grooming behaviour, but if you use too much of it, you will harm your hive, and you will harm the bees in your hive as well.
So thanks everyone for all of your questions. If your specific question wasn't answered here tonight, you can contact our team at the email address, which is shown on the slide that you can see at the moment, or you can check all of the links in the chat where there's quite a lot more information. So unless there's anything further, I'll hand back to Rob now to close the webinar out.
I just want to thank everyone again for your attendance. Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Kathy and Paul. And like I said, we're available anytime. If any other questions come up, just make contact with us. But thank you again. Night, everyone.